was the VC there?
VC was General K. Jai Singh. K. Jai Singh.
Yeah.
Our Vice Chancellor, Dr. Anup Singh, has just joined.
Good morning.
Good morning, sir.
Good morning.
I'm sorry.
Zoom become more sophisticated, so it was asking for a lot of information this time.
So this is what Anviksha has initiated.
Good morning, everyone.
So Anviksha, may we start? So
yes,
should we start? Keshav Kumarji, Major Nilendra Kumar, should we start?
Yeah, we are ready.
Yeah, okay.
A very good morning, everyone. My name is Rishika Garg, and I feel privileged to welcome you all on behalf of Institute of Law, Nirma University, to the 9th International Virtual Conference on International Humanitarian Laws and Refugee Laws. International humanitarian law and refugee law are two aligned laws with common goals for the protection of life, health, and dignity of persons. They form a complex network of complementary protections, which is why it is essential that we understand how they interact. And as it is rightly said by Roger Baldwin, silence never won rights. They are not handed down from above, they are forced by pressures from below. Hence, we are here to break our silence on the matters which seem integral to human race and that need to see the light of the sky. It is a matter of immense pleasure that Institute of Law, Nirma University is hosting the 9th edition of this conference to give us a platform to discuss the critical issues relating to international humanitarian law and refugee law, and for giving us the opportunity to be an audience to such learned speakers. Without any further delay, I would like to request you all to kindly compose yourselves for the prayer.
या कुन्देन्दु तुषारहारधवला या शुभ्रवस्त्रावृता या वीणावरदण्डमण्डितकरा या श्वेतपद्मासना या ब्रह्माच्युतशङ्करप्रभृतिभिः देवैः सदा वन्दिता सा मां पातु सरस्वती भगवती निःशेषजाड्यापहा।
Unmute yourself, Rishika.
Apologies. On our panel today, we have luminaries who are leading the way in their own fields, and it is my honor to introduce them to you all. We have a chief guest, Shri Keshav Kumar, Director Anti-Corruption Bureau at State of Gujarat. We welcome you, sir. We have a guest of honor, Major General Nilendra Kumar, former Judge Advocate General, Indian Army. We welcome you, sir. We have Professor Adam Duman, Assistant Professor of Law and Director of the Masters in International and European Business Law at University of Comala, Spain. We welcome you, sir. We have Ms. Gauri Talwar, Refugee Status Determination Associate, UNHCR Office, Chief of Commission, New Delhi, India. We welcome you, ma'am. We have Dr. Sinod Rajan, Distinguished Professor of Law and Human Rights at Zhejiang Gongshang University, China. We welcome you, sir. We have Dr. Srinivas Bora, Professor, South Asian University, New Delhi. We welcome you, sir. We have Professor Sridhar Patnaik, Associate Professor and Executive Director, Center for South Asian Legal Studies, Jindal Global Law University. We welcome you, sir. We have Professor Chakka Banerjee, Professor of Law and Dean at VIT AP School of Law. We welcome you, sir. This event is presided over by Dr. Anup Kesing, Director General of Nirma University. We welcome you, sir. We have amongst us Professor Dr. Purvi Pokhriyal Ma'am, Dean and Director, Institute of Law, Nirma University. Ma'am holds a master's degree with a specialization in criminal law. She has pursued her doctoral work in the area of constitutional law and holds a postgraduate diploma in business management with an experience of over 15 years in teaching, research, and senior administrators. Ma'am has numerous research papers in national and international journals to her credit. Ma'am is at the forefront of institutional building and is actively engaged in clinical legal education. We welcome you, ma'am. I would once again like to welcome all the dignitaries on the panel. It is your presence which has marked the level of expertise and excellence in this conference. Now, I would request Professor Dr. Purvi Pokhriyal ma'am to address the gathering. Please, ma'am.
Thank you, Rishika. Morning and welcome to the inaugural ceremony of the 9th edition of the Conference on International Humanitarian Law and Refugee Law, organized by the Institute of Law, Nirma University. This year, we are meeting virtually, of course, due to the obvious reasons. And today, I'm very glad to welcome the range of luminaries who are there with us for this conference, and we are honored to have them over here. I, on behalf of the IHL Center team and the Institute of Law, Nirma University, welcome all the guests on this occasion. We have with us Major General Nilendra Kumar with us, former Judge Advocate General and formerly the Director of Amity Law School, Noida. Professor Nilendra Kumar is a passionate academician who have been writing extensively on variety of topics, and he's known as a very acclaimed researcher. And we are honored to have you with us, sir. You have contributed immensely in promotion and dissemination of IHL, and we are blessed to have you for this conference. We are fortunate to have with us Shri Keshav Kumarji, Director General of Police and Director Anti-Corruption Bureau, Gujarat, and formerly Joint Director CBI, Delhi and Mumbai. Shri Keshav Kumar has a great academic inclination and has been contributing immensely on crime forensics in various universities. And it is so great to have Shri Keshav Kumarji over here. And he is going to talk on a very interesting area of humanitarian forensics, which is not much explored even within the IHL circuit. We have with us our respected Director General, Dr. Anup Singh is with us today to shower his blessings. Dr. Singh is leading Nirma University for the last 8 years, and university is spreading its wings in numerous new disciplines under his stewardship. It's so great to have, Professor Duman is going to join us in short while. Professor Duman is from University of Comillas, Spain. This University of Comillas, Spain is a partner university of Nirma University, and Professor Duman is closely associated with our institute, and he has been lecturing extensively in our International Teaching Month at Institute of Law, Nirma University. We have with us eminent guests and experts on IHL who have been contributing immensely in this area in promoting and exploring various contours of IHL and refugee law. Professor Chaka Banerjee, an eminent speaker from VIT University. Professor Sanoj Rajan from Zhejiang Gongzhang University, China. Professor Rajan was also formerly associated with ICRC, and he has been with this institute formally as an ICRC representative in our past events. Professor Srinivas Bura from South Asian University, and our friend Professor Sridhar Patnaik from Jindal Global Law School. At this juncture, my special mention to Ms. Gauri Talwar from UNHCR. We welcome you, Ms. Gauri. It's great to have you on this platform. I'm glad we could continue our legacy of promoting IHL and refugee laws among the students and researchers consistently for the last 9 years. And all credit goes to our faculty heads of the center. For the last 2 years, Professor Anviksha Pachori, IHL Center Head, and her students' team have been successfully leading these activities. Center for International Humanitarian Law and Refugee Law was set up somewhere around in the year 2011. And since that, we have been holding this conference in association with the ICRC with the primary object to disseminate and promote IHL, which is not much explored area amongst the academic fraternity. And we are so glad that for the last 4 editions, we also have been successfully collaborating with the UNHCR, and we started deliberating on the emerging issues of refugee law in this conference. So basically, this conference aims at indulging into an academic discourse, evaluating the status and implementation of various treaties under the IHL and refugee laws. As we all know, we all witnessed 70-year celebration of Geneva Convention recently, but even after 70 years, there have been new evolving greater challenges before us in the IHL arena. And when it comes to refugee law area, last few years, we all have witnessed increase in the forcefully displaced people. There has been a multilateral and multi-stakeholder international response to this issue. But what we felt that, we required to have a very robust framework in order to share this responsibility and burden. And probably what I feel that this conference will provide a platform for a reflective assessment on these issues and how to strengthen the New York Declaration and the Global Compact of Refugees. And every edition of the conference witness paper presentation on wide array of themes, and a few selected papers are published in a book published by Center for IHL and Refugee Human Rights every year. And this helps, as I said earlier, disseminating and promoting new idea exploration amongst the young students and researchers. I hope we would be able to continue this discourse with the support of all the experts over here, and we aspire to achieve a global peace in some day. I once again welcome all the dignitaries for the conference. Thank you so much.
Thank you, ma'am, for your kind words and support. I would now like to call upon the faculty coordinator of the conference, Ms. Anviksha Pachori, to introduce you.
I'm sorry, Rishika. We have with us our Director General, Dr. Anup Singh, and Dr. Anup Singh has some pressing urgent engagement. So I request Dr. Anup Singh to say a few words and convey his best wishes for this conference. Professor Singh.
Thank you, Professor Pokhriyal. At the outset, I'd like to congratulate the Institute of Law for continuing this tradition and organizing the 9th edition of this conference. Every organization has the 4H: the head, the heart, the hands, and the heels. And we universities are always more concerned about the head, that is the intellectual discussion, but equally important is the heart. And for a law school, this topic is related to the heart, and therefore unless the head and heart are in harmony, the results should not be there. So you are doing the right thing. We humans have a tendency to go for camaraderie, to go for community, but we also have the tendency to divide ourselves into we and they. And that's where this whole humanitarian crisis takes place. Whether it is our country, neighboring country, or other parts of the world, the same thing happens. Just last week, we saw a huge humanitarian crisis in our neighboring countries, Pakistan, where 11 Hajaras were killed. And what was their crime? Their crime was they belonged to a particular sect, they belong to a particular ethnicity, they belong to a particular region, and they were not part of the majority, right? Therefore, those people who were in majority, those people who are powerful, they felt that it is judicious for them to kill others. And that's how, we have humanitarian crisis in different parts of the world, where those people who are in majority, those people who are powerful, those people, who have resources, they feel that they can create serious problems for those people who are weaker, those people who are in minority, those people who have less resources. And politicians have created this crisis in most of the countries, in most of the places. So if we think that the political class is going to help us, I don't think that, we would be able to achieve. For example, I was talking about this Hazara crisis. This crisis has its roots at the time of Ziaul Haq. So there was an organization, and this organization had the patronage of Ziaul Haq. And when this crisis happened, then Hazara was told that, look, Mr. Prime Minister, you come and you give us some solace. And Prime Minister said, oh, don't blackmail me, right? You first bury your people, then I will come. And it so happened that they buried, and the Prime Minister went over there not to sympathize, but to show that, look, you can't blackmail me, and we are more powerful than you. So if political class cannot help, if most of the people in this society cannot help, and they are totally oblivious, totally indifferent to such crisis, then who is going to be, savior? And I think only legal profession is going to be the savior. And this is where, luminaries like Kishore Kumar ji, Liren ji, Gauri Talwar ji, and other people who are here, they are going to enlighten our students that what they can do. And even if our students can do a bit for such situations, I have hope for the future of humanity. And to conclude, I wish all the best for the success of the conference, and wish all students great learning. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you for your encouraging and enlightening words, sir. Now I would like to call upon the faculty coordinator of the conference, Ms. Anviksha Pachori, to introduce and brief you about the conference.
Good morning to all the dignitaries, academicians, participants, and the lovely students who have joined here today into this conference today. Center for International Humanitarian Law and Human Rights, Institute of Law, University Ahmedabad is organizing its 9th edition of annual flagship event, which is an international virtual conference on international humanitarian law and refugee law, in collaboration with International Committee of Red Cross and United Nations High Commissioner for Refugee. Last year, we have celebrated the 70th anniversary of Geneva Convention, and we had huge participation across the country. But this time, the whole scenario has changed, as we can see that the conference in itself is happening virtually. Since then, because a lot has changed, we cannot even imagine our lives without the technological tools that we are having it today. On the same line, the means and method of warfare has also changed. How the warfare is taking place through drones, how the combatants are being killed through the technological advancement, how the concept of warfare itself and the battlefield is become obsolete is something which is new to us. And on the same line, we have come up with some innovative themes which would help in more discussion and discourse in this particular field. So looking at the ever-changing world, we have come up with the themes which would promote and reflect the successes and challenges of the treaty implementation, new and advancement in the field of IHL that have been universally ratified. Also, when it comes to the refugee law, we have seen in the last 5 years that the people are forcibly displaced in a large number. And the key part of the international response has been a multilateral effort to develop an architecture to share the responsibility for the hosting and supporting of the world's refugee. It's a collaborative effort. So the conference will offer a reflective assessment for the regime strengthening exercise. And the milestone is to have the New York Declaration, Global Compact on Refugees, the first global refugee forum, which would assess what has been achieved and what are the challenges which lie ahead. So the conference will also reflect the emergence of the COVID-19 pandemic, its impact on the international refugee response regime. Looking at the major themes which are of the conference and introducing it to the whole audience is first is the blurring lines between civilians and combatant due to technological advancement in warfare under the Geneva Convention. How there is no distinction which is being made between civilian and combatant is what we are looking for here. Second is good practices of refugee protection in India and South Asia. The third is supporting urban refugee during COVID-19 pandemic, challenges and solution. The fourth is analysis of recent judgment in IHL for strengthening its enforcement and implementation. The fourth is the health and danger in, fifth is health care in danger. Sixth is challenges and prospect of humanitarian organization. These themes are being discussed with ICRC and UNHCR, and that's how we have come up with these themes. And we are glad to share that we have received paper from NLSIU Bangalore, NUJS, NALSA, GNLU, Jamia Millia, OP Jindal Global University, HPNLU, ILS, SLS, and many more. We are so happy that all the participants have also joined here today to the conference, and they will be joining after that for the track session, which will be parallelly going on from 11:30 to 2. We are really looking forward to all the academic discourse and presentation of the participants. Thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you, Rishika.
Thank you, ma'am, for the insight. It is now time to release the conference proceedings of the 8th Institute of Law Nirma University National Student Conference on International Humanitarian Law and Refugee Law. I request Professor Dr. Purvi Prokhriyal ma'am to do the honors.
We really wanted to grace it with Major General Yendra Kumar and Sri Keshav Kumar ji. We could not dispatch this thing to you. So on behalf of both of you, I'm just releasing this booklet and I would request Anviksha to share this copy with all the esteemed guests, right? Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. It is indeed my pleasure to invite the chief guest of the event, Sri Keshav Kumar sir, to address the conference. Sir has been in the active police service for 33 years now. Sir has specialization in the application of forensic and crime investigation. So far, Sir has aided in conviction of about 54 people solely based on forensic application using the latest scientific aids and tools during the investigation. While investigating the lion poaching case of Gir Sanctuary in Gujarat, Sir has stumbled upon a new area and created a new domain in the wildlife crime investigation. We all are delighted to have you here, sir. Please, sir.
Thank you so much for inviting, and I welcome all the participants here, and I'm very honored to be with all of you. I have only 10 minutes and I have a long presentation with me, so I will rush with the presentation so that I don't transgress upon the time of others. Please start. Yeah, thank you so much. So much for the conference here. Now, I will be talking about the police and humanitarian forensics. I thought, this is an area which is just very dear to me, and I have recently come across this. And I find a great amount of application in the police service here. Now, what exactly is humanitarian forensics? Is proper and dignified management of dead bodies and facilitating their identification. Now, if we come across, where do we get this? So it is from two areas. Number one, the disasters, natural and man-made. Now, road accidents. If you see any time on the highway, there will be a number of vehicles who have met accident, and number of people would have died in that. In such cases, how do we identify the person? Maybe he is from different state. How do we identify him? Now we coming about the railway accidents. I happened to investigate the Gyaneshwari train accident case of Calcutta when I was in the CBI, and about 148 people had died. So the identification of those people, the passengers who were dead, was very difficult. And it was through the DNA fingerprinting that we were able to identify at least 36 people out of them. So, my brush started with humanitarian forensics with this train accident. These are some of the representative photographs of accidents on the railways. Now, this is the Gyaneshwari train accident case, which took place on the 28th of May 2010 in West Midnapur district of West Bengal. Some of the photographs are very, very horrifying. Now, this is the accident site. Two trains who were running opposite to each other, they collided with each other with full speed, and one of the train was loaded with iron ore. So you can imagine the momentum. See, this is how the engines collided with each other. And if you can see it very carefully, you will see number of mangled bodies, dead bodies here. Pointer kar do, Harish, one. Dead bodies. You can see one dead body. This is one body. This is one body. And there are several, you can see the legs, here strewing all the apart. It was a very, very horrifying scene. You can see the dead bodies. Now, the list of, if we go across the number of, accidents that take place, the list of human stampedes in holy places in India since 2012, there are so many of them. Now, let's come to the issue of the unidentified dead bodies, which the police officer faces every day in and out all over the country. Now, these are the types of unidentified dead bodies that we get. Now, how to identify these people? And if a survey was made, and we found that worldwide, about 4 to 10% of the total dead bodies reported to mortuary are unidentified. And this proportion rises to 25% in a country like India. So if you see, worldwide it's 4 to 10%, but in India, the case of unidentified dead bodies is hopping 25%. So you can imagine the scope of work in this field. And this field has just not been touched by any of the professionals. Now, who is the first responder in case of any accident? So, role of the police as the first responder. The first responders are the local people. The second responders are the police. Now, what is police doing? It is doing rescue, then help rescue teams, then victim identification, then handing over the dead body, preservation of the dead body, and disposal of the dead. Now, if we see what are the legal provisions in India with regard to all these. So we have CRPC 174, wherein police to inquire and report on suicide and other cases. Gujarat Anatomy Act 2011, we have a very good act here in Gujarat. Now, provisions in Gujarat Police Manual for accidental suspicious death, we have rule number so and so. Now, what are the things to be done by the police officer? Their identification of dead body, they're taking photographs, finger impression, then they're filling the descriptive role, the mouse of identification, inquest, post-mortem examination. Then what are the methods of human identification? Fingerprints, DNA, forensic odontology, unique medical condition. Then DNA is unique to every individual, easily obtainable, and does not change during the lifetime. Then DNA profiling assists in the most important aspect of giving back to the society. Now, confirmation of human identity is essential for familial closure, the decency and dignity of the deceased, law and judicial requirements. These are some of the methods which can assist in identification. Now, with regard to the success of DNA sampling, which we are received from many other exhibits like tooth, talus bones, this is the skeletal, this is the success rate. So the highest success rate is with tooth. So let us focus on forensic odontology. What are my prescriptions? My prescriptions are that inclusion of humanitarian forensics as a subject during basic police training course, then training for police, Then better synergy between police and municipalities. Then allocation of exclusive funds at the police station level to cater to the needs of humanitarian forensics. A uniform mechanism may be need to be developed to facilitate timely disposal to fulfill the adage care womb to tomb. To make a concerted effort at all India level by the Medical Council of India, the Dental Council of India, and the National Human Rights Commissions to look into the matter and prevent human rights violations of the disease in public interest. Then continued medical education, workshops with doctors, police, and law enforcement agencies. Now, this new forensic application technology, that is 3D photo fitting, that is a wonderful thing wherein the entire model of the person can be created from a speck of DNA. Let us get going in this field. Although this is a new area and we don't have that facilities, but it has been in use in US. I had a video, but I'm not sharing it. You know, how did the Air India help us in this? Then they were, when the dead bodies had to be brought here, they tied up with Air India. And, you know, some work was done in the field of humanitarian forensics. I have not much to say, but just try to introduce this concept to all of the people here. Good to see you. Thank you so much. I'm sorry I had to rush. I'm sorry I had to rush.
Thank you, sir, for your wonderful words. Moving on, now I would like to invite our guest of honor, Major General Nalendra Kumar, former Judge Advocate General, Indian Army. Sir is also the former director of Amity Law School, Amity University, Noida. He is the founder director of Lex Consilium Foundation. Sir was felicitated with Vishisht Seva Medal in 2004 and Ati Vishisht Seva Medal as well. Sir has presented papers on legal education, ethics, constitution, nuclear liability bill, amongst other issues. Sir has also authored books on military law and other subjects. We are delighted to have you, sir. If you could please address the event.
Good morning, everyone, and particularly my regards to Mr. Keshav Kumar, who's chairing this session, and the director, Professor Purvi Pokhriyal. It's a matter of extreme honor for me to get this opportunity to speak to you. And in the short time available to me, I would just rush through a presentation that I have made especially for this session, where I would like to indicate that the significance that we talk of the give to the Geneva Conventions, that it is the only law that provides protection to the injured, unarmed, and civilians in the armed conflicts. That's what the Geneva Conventions were intended when they were framed in 49 and India became a signatory. And it is also bears its relevance because of the wide acceptance that out of almost the entire charter of the United Nations, that is 196 state parties have acceded to it. They have ratified and joined this. I'm also aware of three very significant and relevant themes that were selected by the organizers for this day-long session. And in fact, nothing better could have been brought out at this point of time, which is there on the slide in front of you. However, I would like to tell you that insofar as plus side is concerned, like Purviji indicated, it was the 70 years of Geneva Convention, and the last year, there was a completion of the work relating to the updated commentary of Geneva Convention number 3 of the peer review committee for this, and the hard copy of the new commentary is likely to be available next month. And the next month is also significant because the Oxford University Press is bringing out the 4th edition of the Handbook of International Humanitarian Law. It's edited by a very eminent personality, well known in IHL, Professor Dieter Fleck. And I was fortunate to have been associated with this project for writing one complete chapter. Now, us in the face today, the main challenge is the effective implementation on the ground during armed conflict. It's never to be forgotten that IHL comes into play whenever there is an armed conflict. And the principal operators there are the men in uniform. And therefore, the men in uniform, to the parties to the conflict, they must know the IHL conventions. The difficulty is that the conventions that were drafted in 49 are Eurocentric. They use a very technical and complex language, which is beyond even a normal law person, what to say a soldier. And therefore, there is a need to simplify the text, which is the main challenge. And this text should be taken across to all the actors who are responsible to abide by the IHL so that there are no breaches or grave breaches. This, to my mind, is the main challenge. The direct participation in hostilities is the second challenge. There is the notion of civilization of conflict because of the improvements civilians who are being seen in the battle zone. They may be private security companies, they may be the computer operators, communication experts. They are taking part in the conflict, and there is that revolving door concept. And therefore, because of increasing involvement of civilians, how to shelter them, how to protect them, to what extent they would be saved by the IHL, this is a big problem. And another two examples here in front of you, just to indicate to you, is the increasing role of artificial intelligence and pilotless aircraft, which are commonly known as drones. Now, how far are the IHL provisions applicable in these situations? This is an area that is confronting the experts and practitioners. Now, coming specifically to our Indian context, I would take a few minutes. The difficulties and the challenges for us in India is, number one, instruments of acceptance. I will devote a little time to this. Then there is a need of transparency connected with it. It is to be appreciated that India was one of the first countries to have ratified Geneva Conventions. But strangely thereafter, there have been a number of instruments of equal relevance, significance, and application from which India has kept away. What's the reason? That's what I'm talking and hinting at transparency, and the dissemination I have already included. Now you see here on this slide, and I'll move to the slide number 2, it has got 6 prominent statutes from which, these are IHL instruments from which India has kept away. Starting with additional protocol 1 of 77, you find other additional protocols. There is a convention for protection of all persons from enforced disappearances, and the Rome Statute, International Criminal Court. There is absence of any white paper from the governments. Different governments have been at the center. There are no parliamentary questions. There is no discussion as to whether to keep away from these international instruments, where significantly at the discussion and preparatory stage, India took an active part. But when it came to signing, we have kept away. Now, it calls for a discussion, for a decision, whether it is in national interest to continue like this, or it calls for a change in the policy. The other, Protection of Cultural Property Convention, anti-personnel mine ban. Anti-personnel mines, you know that on all our borders. Now, it can be said that we are not yet so advanced that we can keep air surveillance on all our borders. But then a reservation clause could have been made use of, that, okay, in principle, we agree with the AP mine ban, but for next 30 years, it would not be possible for us, say that from such or such year, we would be in a position to join, or say we would start from eastern sector or western sector, or whatever. But unfortunately, we find that there is a total silence. Likewise, for cluster mines convention, arms trade treaty, and the Treaty on Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons 2017. Now, these 11 IHL instruments that I listed before you are all those where India is not a signatory. Now, if you're thinking of those 5 trillion economy and a permanent seat at Security Council, then it needs a proper decisions which have been joined by hundreds of other countries, and we, without any reason, are reluctant to be a party to them. The next issue is dissemination, and dissemination both within the armed forces, who are the principal instrumentality for complying with the IHL, graduate level. There are a couple of universities which have offered syllabus that needs quite looking into. Stark reality that there is a general lack of public understanding of IHL. And so much so that not only the public, even the armed forces, I'm sorry to say I was part of the army for 39 years, but this is one area that has remained neglected, and we do not have adequate literature on the IHL to facilitate its realistic training to the various trades and rank and file to the extent to which they should be aware. Now, this, I would like to compare what I have just stated by the chart in front of you. This indicates the slide, the number of publications which other countries, I have just taken at random 6. Our neighbors, Nepal has 1 publication, Sri Lanka has 2, US has 18, China has 2. And what are these publications I am talking about? These publications relate to law of war manual or prisoners of war handling manual, a handbook, manual on detainee operations, soldier's guide, military manual, yearbook. Now, these are the sort of publications, and I have put the image of 3 in front of you, which other countries have brought out, and they are being timely and regularly revised. Unfortunately, we show a total absence of any of this literature. And mind you, this is the situation when, right after attaining independence in 47, India has been constantly and consistently dragged into armed conflicts. So much so that in 71 war with Pakistan, India got the prisoners of war ever. And yet, there is no training document as to how to deal with those situations. I would also like to say, and candidly, that technical assistance, this is one area where ICRC was expected to come forward for preparation of commentaries, and the commentaries are needed, as I said, because the language is complex. Talk of chaplains. Now there, because it is in a Western context where Christianity was the main religion, so they could only think of chaplain. Easily it could have been substituted by religious teacher. So therefore, there is a need to go into simple text commentaries and in Hindi and other languages which the soldiers can understand, and that would lead to a greater acceptance and adherence to IHL. We have no case studies. I just mentioned that 71 war, there were more than 90,000 prisoners and there's not one case study. Then before 71 war, there were lakhs of cases of infiltrations, Bangladeshis, refugees, which entered India. Mrs. Indira Gandhi was the prime minister and a refugee tax was introduced at that point of time. Now that was the enormity of the situation which the country had to face, and there is no case studies single relating to IHL. Also, the other thing is in area of grave breaches. IHL says what can be done, what is not to be done particularly. And what is not to be done amounts to either a breach or grave breach of IHL, Geneva Conventions. Ironically, the wars before that, Goa operations, Hyderabad operations and all that. But from 62 till Kargil war, there is not one judgment to indicate the juristic thought about the provisions insofar which is very difficult to believe that there was no violation, whether grave breach or otherwise during all these wars. We have simply no literature to draw lessons from. And that's why there is a total void of IHL jurisprudence. You would find that there is not one case. And as opposed to this, if you look at other countries, whether there are situations relating to judgments of ICC now or the former tribunals, Nuremberg trials or the European Court of Human Rights, American Court of Human Rights, there are hundreds of judgments relating to IHL and there is not one from Indian judiciary. Insofar as legal education is concerned, because you're going to have a number of academics and this meet is taking place in a university, I would like to indicate that according to my humble view, there is a lack of standard curriculum that needs to be drawn up. Perhaps Professor Purvi Pokhriyal may like to take a lead in this regard. There is resultantly dearth of standard literature to teach, and there is also shortage of suitable faculty. The National Law School at Bhopal, only a few months back, they had invited me to run through a program on IHL for their fourth year students, where it was, I think, a compulsory paper. There is also an issue relating to Nodal Agency. IHL concerns protection and humanitarian relief during war. Now, for some strange reason, IHL and particularly the relationship with the ICRC, it's a political decision, has been given to the Ministry for External Affairs rather than remaining within the domain of the Ministry of Defense. Now, humanitarian norms, it is understood the government has taken a position, the government is a signatory to the Geneva Conventions, but thereafter this is a matter that comes up in armed conflict situations, as I have said repeatedly today. Therefore, more appropriately, they should be handled by the Ministry of Defense, which has not been done. In conclusion, within the short time that was available to me, but I think I have underlined the main points. I think that the executive, that is, by that I mean the state, the defense forces and the academia, I would also here like to include, deviate from the slide to say the media have all to take a lead in the increased dissemination and compliance of IHL that would be conducive and in tune with India's position as a major power. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Major General Nilendra Kumar. You are absolutely right when you said there is a dearth of literature and the faculty colleagues. And here I just would like to mention that ICRC has been conducting this kind of a faculty training program to strengthen this promotion and dissemination of this area in the law schools. And somewhere around before 3 years or so, we had an opportunity to organize the faculty development program exclusively for the West region, so that the interested faculty colleagues can be trained properly, and we can promote the IHL in this in these law colleges in this region. So you're absolutely right when it comes to the literature and the capacity building in this area. Thank you so much for a wonderful presentation, Professor Nilendra Kumar. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, ma'am. Now I would like to invite Professor Adam Duman, Assistant Professor of Law and Director of the Masters in International and European Business Law at University of Colima, Spain. Sir is a specialist in human rights and international development in sub-Saharan Africa. Sir has extensive human rights experience in countries such as Uganda, Kenya, Rwanda, and Angola. Sir holds a PhD from University of Madrid, where he wrote his doctoral thesis on access to justice for sex workers in Uganda. We are delighted to have you, sir.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for inviting me. Namaste to everyone. A pleasure to see everyone. My apologies for attending a little late, but it's quite early in the morning here. And actually, I've been traveling. I'm in the north of Spain. We have a university event here, so I just arrived in quite late yesterday evening. So my apologies for attending a bit late, but warm regards to my esteemed colleagues and to everyone. First of all, I hope everyone is well, and thank you very much to Nirma for inviting me today, with a special thanks to my good friend Professor Anviksha and everyone who's joining this conference. I want to send my regards and appreciation to Madam Dean Purvey for her amazing leadership as Dean of the Law School and her constant sort of endeavor to put together such relevant and important opportunities for scholars and students. I had the good fortune of visiting Nirma University about a year ago for International Teaching Month. It was an amazing experience working with the fantastic students and professors from the university, many of whom I've kept in contact with. I'm always struck by the inquisitiveness of your students and their interest in human rights and related topics. The famous modernist Ezra Pound talked about this idea of let's make it new, and that's exactly what Nirma does, under the leadership of Dean Purvey, along with the spectacular faculty and thinking about innovative approaches to academia. So really a pleasure again to be part of Nirma University and the events and conferences like this that you organize. So thank you to everyone and especially the leadership. I know there's a lot to discuss today, so I don't want to take up too much time, but I thought I'd briefly address the issue of access to justice. I recently published a book on gender, poverty, and access to justice in sub-Saharan Africa. So I thought I'd offer some reflections on the topic based on my own experiences to think about how we can extend access to justice to marginal populations, such as refugees, in better fulfillment of their rights. Now, I want to call attention to this human right that's known as access to justice, but really what it is an amalgamation of rights, including, for instance, the right to a fair trial, effective remedy, and equal protections of the law. Contained within the UDHR and all subsequent treaties are the rights which grant access to justice. There's no sense really in rehashing how many people around the world lack access to justice or some of the larger structural or institutional issues that limit access to justice in both developed and developing countries. So I won't do that now. I think it goes without saying that those in vulnerable situations, such as refugees or those caught in humanitarian conflicts and disasters, are often least able to enforce their rights. What I'd prefer to do is, What I'd prefer to do is offer some reflections, as I said, based on my academic and field work about how to improve access to justice, with the hope that some of these lessons could be extrapolated to apply to policy aimed at refugees and, again, individuals caught in humanitarian situations. So access to justice is really at the very basis of ensuring the realization of every other right contained within the human rights framework. We can't begin to talk about other rights, whether in the Refugee Convention or others, if we don't first talk about access to justice. No other human right really is as interdependent with every other right as those involving access to justice, nor is there any other right as commonly found in all international human rights treaties as those having to do with access to justice. Access to justice is a central component to development as well, allowing, again, for the enforcement of human rights and the establishment of conditions necessary to advance the rule of law and good governance and the sustainable development goals. Justice is also central to ending the rights violations produced by environmental degradation, which in regions such as sub-Saharan Africa is increasingly pushing migrants towards greater urban densities and across borders, all of which are placing tremendous strains on governments and the overall socioeconomic well-being of those impacted, especially children. And at the end of the day, access to justice is central to basic notions of dignity, justice, and well-being, the hallmarks of any civilized society, and central to mitigating the conditions that often lead to migratory flows and conflict. Recognizing the importance of access to justice, what's already been written about it, and thinking about my own field work in this area, I want to briefly share some reflections about how access to justice can be improved generally, again, based on my own observations. So the first point I want to make is how we conceptualize access to justice. Access to justice is generally understood as having two main components, the substantive, the laws, and then the procedural arm of justice. But there's a third element that often gets ignored, and that is the culture, norms, and traditions that often create an obstacle to access to justice. We can't advance substantive and procedural forms of access to justice unless we target the more indirect barriers and forms of discrimination that preclude the exercise of the procedural and substantive arms of justice. By culture, I mean, for instance, stereotyping, a belief that gender roles are somehow defined by tradition or by society, or the double marginalization, for instance, that's oftentimes faced by someone who is a refugee, but also gay, lesbian, or transgender. We need to reflect on our own stereotyping and prejudices, which sometimes create, or sometimes our own worst enemy, really, and create obstacles towards expanding access to justice. We need to review our policies and identify areas where culture may impede, albeit indirectly, access to justice for marginalized communities, such as refugees or those in conflict situations. Courts, lawyers, programs, officers, paralegals, those working in the field need to enter into the guided exercise of cultural bias identification, excuse me, to begin limiting sort of the unfortunate and pervasive biases that often stop justice in its tracks for the millions of people, especially those in difficult situations. The second point I want to make is that too often we think about access to justice in terms of access to the courts or law in a traditional sense. As lawyers, judges, as UN workers, we think about that access to justice oftentimes starts in the courts with lawyers. But it starts at a much more micro level. It starts with social workers, paralegal, program officers, village elders, and other figures in our towns, cities, villages, refugee camps, informal settlements, who are often the first port of entry into the world of justice. This means that when we design an access to justice program, we need to engage with those who are outside of the legal system or the formal legal system. In other words, how can we make sure that locals are part of this sphere of justice and not outside of it? How can we make sure that somebody who is within a refugee camp, who themselves is seeking justice, may be able to take part in the exercise of justice by helping others? It begins with defining access to justice in much broader terms than just courts and lawyers. We can look, for example, to African countries and how they've integrated customary courts into formal justice mechanisms, their own constitutions, as a way of broadening the sphere of justice to include informal and non-formal traditional actors, including in refugee camps and other areas, for instance, on the border of Kenya and Somalia. My third point is, in preparing policies and program officers should engage in a task of what I call justice streamlining. Similar to what we often hear about gender streamlining, we also need to consider how we can streamline justice through each of our policies. If we understand that human rights form the basis of our approach to development, to assisting refugees, to assisting those who are in humanitarian disasters or conflict situations, then the question is, how can each of our policies integrate, either directly or indirectly, some form of justice to ensure that the rights which are given to these individuals no longer remain elusive? And that is, I think, we need to, in many ways, sort of hone in on this idea of justice streamlining, this idea in each of the policies that we create, how do we create sort of an intersectionality of justice through all of those. My fourth point is, we oftentimes spend a lot of money and time instituting fancy digitalization programs, justice reforms and case monitoring mechanisms in the court, all of which are important, but we tend to forget about the basics. Access to justice starts when people know their rights and how to enforce them, and not necessarily always from a purely juridical point of view. Courts, in fact, should really only be a last resort. For every person who has access to justice, thousands more are stuck without any idea of what to do about the land grab, the violence they take, the inability to enforce educational rights in refugee camps, to seek access to water and food, and so on. Access to justice begins with people knowing their rights and how to enforce them. It begins with a woman knowing that what rights she has and not what rights her husband says she has. It begins with children in schools knowing that the Convention on the Rights of the Child exists and can be enforced. It begins with a refugee knowing about the Convention and their own rights and how to seek enforcement of these rights. Information at the most basic levels must be central to any functioning access to justice program. A few more points. This goes more to law schools, but too often upper level law students are an underutilized group in providing access to justice. How can we better utilize them for the provision of legal aid? Students in university legal clinics do an excellent job of providing information about rights and outreach in communities. But what else could they do in order to make up for the shortfall of legal aid lawyers and paralegals? And again, I don't know to what extent this is applicable in India, but certainly in Spain, in the United States, this tends to be the case where there is a significant shortfall of legal aid lawyers. And I suspect in India, it's similar. In some countries around the world, such as the US, law students under the supervision of admitted lawyers have increasingly been used to represent women and refugees seeking assistance to the state. Law students, many of whom come from different areas of the country, can also be taught to set up legal aid clinics in their own towns and villages for immigrants, for refugees, conduct training, train the trainer exercises, and engage in pro bono work that seeks to limit potential disputes and assist with the enforcement of rights. In New York State, for instance, law students are now required to complete 100 hours of pro bono service before being able to qualify for the bar. Many of these students are dedicating their time to assisting refugees, filling out paperwork, and seeking to legalize their status under US law. Two more points that I'll make. My next point is access to justice. It has to do with technology. And access to justice technology, I would argue, is too often times supply side oriented. But with, as I said before, investments made mainly in case handling and monitoring and digitalizing the courts. This, of course, as I said, is important, but we also need to ensure that everyone has access to mobile technology, which is not particularly costly these days. What types of services can be offered via smartphone or SMS? we have a growing number of examples, such as in Kenya, labor lawyers at firms who work through pro bono to respond to labor law queries, rights information being sent to women in refugee camps who might be seeking to escape, for instance, an abusive partner. And this is demand-side centered technology that needs to be expanded within humanitarian zones and to refugees if access to justice is going to arrive to the hardest of populations to reach. My last point here, and this is kind of a side note in a way, has increasingly been focusing on pop culture and how that intersects with human rights. What I want to briefly mention is how we can use pop culture as a conduit towards advancing access to justice. Right now, I'm working on a book about Eurovision, the song contest, and human rights. And thinking about this in an Indian context, well, one word comes to mind, and that is Bollywood, which I'm a big fan of. And nothing reaches a population right as much as in India Bollywood, but globally cinema. And increasingly, the United Nations has actually been using cinema to advance certain messages. For example, the United Nations recently published a video working with Bollywood producers on LGBT rights and gender equality. So I would reflect and think about what cinema or music, for that matter, can do to provide information on access to justice to hard to reach communities, particularly, for instance, refugee communities. How can we use these video messages, which can be sent through demand side oriented technology, right? SMS and data programs to make refugees, for instance, in camps, aware of the rights that they have. And this, I believe, is a powerful and overlooked tool in advancing messages and information campaigns that are so central and really at the basis of access to justice. So I'm going to end here. I hope these reflections shed some light on how we can continue to advance access to justice to achieve greater implementation of human rights, the SDGs, and other policies and programs that seek to protect the well-being of others, particularly refugees and those caught in humanitarian conflicts. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much for the insightful lecture, sir. Here, I would like to quote Peter Maurer, president of ICRC, who rightly said that in our fiber optic world of tweets and tablets, we are more conscious of the world. The humanitarian abuses of today are just a flick of a switch away. In our homes, in the train, in the coffee shops, we see it, we feel it, we know all about it. Thank you, sir. Now, moving on, I would request Ms. Gauri Tilwar, Refugee Status Determination Associate, UNHCR Office Chief of Mission, New Delhi. Ma'am has completed her Bachelor's of Law from Guru Gobind Singh Indraprastha University, Amity Law School, New Delhi. Ma'am has also completed post-graduation diploma course in International Humanitarian, Refugee and Human Rights Law from Indian Academy of International Law, New Delhi, where she was awarded the prestigious Judge Nagendra Singh Commemorative Gold Medal for Excellence. Ma'am has authored various publications in the area of humanitarian law and has undertaken 22 UN trainings from 2016 till 2020. Please, ma'am.
Thank you so much, Rishika, for giving me the floor. And esteemed ladies and gentlemen, a very good morning and a big hello from New Delhi. We from UNHCR India are very pleased to be here today, especially in the presence of such august dignitaries today. UNHCR notes that the Institute of Law at Nirma University has been successfully organizing the annual conference on international humanitarian and refugee laws for the last 9 years, promoting various discussions on the successes and challenges of treaty implementation. And UNHCR supports this year's annual conference as we did for the past 2 years. While the COVID-19 pandemic has prevented us from meeting each other face to face, it is extremely praiseworthy that the Institute of Law is organizing the event this year virtually. UNHCR, the UN Refugee Agency, is a global organization dedicated to saving lives, protecting rights, and building a better future for refugees, forcibly displaced communities, and stateless people. While 79.5 million people around the world have been forced to flee their homes, nearly 26% of them are refugees, around half of whom are under the age of 18. There are also millions of stateless people who have been denied a nationality and lack access to basic rights, such as education, healthcare, employment, and freedom of movement. At a time when 1% of the entire world's population have fled their homes as a result of conflict or persecution, our work at UNHCR remains more important than ever before. On 17th of December 2018, the United Nations General Assembly in New York affirmed the Global Compact on Refugees after 2 years of extensive and thorough consultations by UNHCR with member states, international organizations, refugees, civil society, the private sector, and the experts. The Global Compact on Refugees, as many of you will be aware, is a framework for more predictable and equitable responsibility sharing, recognizing that a sustainable solution to refugee situations cannot be achieved without international cooperation. Its 4 objectives are, and I would just like to reiterate it for you all. Number 1, to ease the pressures on host countries. 2, to enhance refugee self-reliance. To expand access to third country solutions. And lastly, to support conditions in countries of origin for return in safety and dignity. The COVID-19 pandemic impacted refugees and asylum seekers globally, including in India, who are among the most marginalized members of society. UNHCR and other stakeholders continue to work together in line with the spirit of the Global Compact on Refugees, whose approach is to involve the whole of society, the various stakeholders, including the academicians, researchers, and university students, very much like the gathering like we all see here today. We at UNHCR send our best regards to each and every one of you and hope that you will all have a successful conference ahead in the day with myriad engaging, fruitful,
Thank you so much, ma'am, for your enlightening words. I'm sure each one of us present here is delighted to hear and learn from the guest speakers for the day. It is time for a vote of thanks by the student chairperson of Center for International Humanitarian Law and Human Rights, Institute of Law, Nirma University, Shubham Vijay.
Good morning, everyone. It gives me immense pleasure to propose a vote of thanks to all the dignitaries on the panel today. I, Shubham Vijay, Chairperson of Center for International Humanitarian Law and Human Rights and the student coordinator for the conference, on behalf of Institute of Law Nirma University, would like to extend my sincere gratitude to our Honorable Chief Guest, Shri Keshav Kumar, Director, Anti-Corruption Bureau of the State of Gujarat, for addressing the conference and gracing the same with his presence. Further, I would like to extend my sincere vote of thanks to our guest of honor, Major General Nilendra Kumar Sir, former Judge Advocate General Indian Army, our collaborators, International Committee of Red Cross, and Ms. Gauri Talwar, Representative UNHCR India. Further, I would like to thank Director General Nirma University, Dr. Anup K. Singh, and our panelist, Dr. Adam Duman, Professor, University of Comillas, Spain, Professor Dabiru Sridhar Patnaik, O.P. Jindal Global University, Sonipat, NCR Delhi, Professor Sanoj Rajan, Dr. Zhejiang Gongshang University, China, Dr. Srinivas Burra, Professor South Asian University, New Delhi, Dr. Chakka Banerjee, Professor of Law and Dean VIT AP School of Law. And all the participants present here with us today, I thank you all. Also, I would like to take this opportunity to thank Professor Dr. Purvi Pokhriyal, Director and Dean, Institute of Law, Nirma University, Ms. Anviksha Pachori, Faculty Coordinator and Head, Center for IHL. Ladies and gentlemen, an event of this dimension cannot happen overnight. The wheels start rolling months in advance. We have been fortunate enough to be backed by a team who is very motivated and dedicated student volunteers, and further the administrative staff, without whom it wouldn't have been possible to organize the conference in such a well-planned manner. So thank you so much to our team as well. Once again, I would like to thank all the respected dignitaries, the participants, and the students for being with us today. Thank you and have a nice day.
We thank everybody Thank you for joining us. There are a little bit of details that we want to give to all the participants, academicians, and students who are present here. All the participants will be joining the track session. The link has already been given. The judges who have joined us today will be joining the parallel track sessions after the session. The score sheets have already been provided to the judges. Each lineup has been set up and it has already been given to the participants. And we are really looking forward to all the academic discourse that is going to happen post 11:30. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks. Thank you all. Thank you, Professor Adam Duman, for joining us. And we look forward to have you again over here. Thank you, Keshav Kumarji. Thank you, Major Narendra Kumar. Thank you all. And with this, we come to an end of the inaugural ceremony. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Dean Purvey. Always a pleasure to be here. And just very quickly, if I may, I went very quickly into my speech, and I just wanted to send my particular regards and greetings to Mr. Keshav Kumar. Pleasure to see you, and as well to Major General Nilendra Kumar, who many years ago actually I met, I believe, at Amity University. So a pleasure to greet both of you as well, and nice to coincide here.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you. We'll be meeting for the track sessions. So all the participants, you'll be given the link. And Professor Sanoj Rajan, Professor Chakka Banerjee, Professor Srinivas Barra, Srinivas Sridhar Patnaik, we are really thankful to you for joining this inaugural. We'll be looking forward for the panel session. Thank you so much.